This is Business Edge. I'm Tolulokwe Adeleru Balogun. Our headline stories: Ghana MPC has met. We'll get into the outcome of their meeting. And GSS to digitize 2021 census. Now, Ghana's Monetary Policy Committee has held its 99th meeting and maintained the benchmark interest rate at 14.5% for a sixth consecutive meeting. The MPC is monitoring the impact of new tax measures on inflation, also citing pressure from rising crude oil prices. We'll also look at Ghana's plans to digitize its upcoming census. Welcome. This is Business Edge. The Bank of Ghana's Monetary Policy Committee has reviewed global and domestic development and retained its lending rate at 14.5% based on its current outlook for Ghana's economy. The committee stated that the global economic recovery is underway, although new variants of the COVID-19 virus affected economic activity in Q4 2020 into Q1 2021. But the continued policy support and ongoing vaccine rollout efforts have helped boost optimism and investor confidence for a stronger rebound in economic activity for 2021. The Ghanaian economy is rebounding with sustained momentum as economic activity picks up gradually. The bank's updated composite index of economic activity recorded an annual growth of 13.9% in January 2021. This is the highest since December 2019, compared to 3.4% in the corresponding period of 2020. On budget execution, provisional data from the Ministry of Finance indicated that 2020 recorded an overall broad cash budget deficit of 11.7% of the GDP against the revised targets of 11.4% for the year. The primary balance also recorded a deficit of 5.3% of the GDP compared to the revised target deficit of 4.6% of GDP. Joining me from Accra, Ghana is financial analyst Benjamin Ato Kwanzaa. Benjamin, nice to have you back on Business Edge. Thank you for joining me once again.
Pleasure to be here.
So according to the bank, the inflation has remained above pre-pandemic levels, with price development in the first 2 months of 2020 being broadly mixed. The two readings in the first 2 months showed that headline inflation eased from 10.4% in December 2020 to 9.9% in January of 2021. It subsequently went up to 10.3% in February. What likely impact will keeping the lending rate at 14.5% have on headline inflation in Ghana?
Okay, I think the 2021 budget has set the country on a path to economic recovery. Over the years, the government's inflation target has been 8% with a symmetrical band of plus or minus 2%. And so every decision that the Monetary Policy Committee takes is pretty much aimed at achieving this. Now, at the moment, Ghana's inflation is slightly above the upper band limit, and with the introduction of new taxes, people are going to have to spend more, even though their purchasing powers are still static. Government has informed workers in the public sector not to expect any significant increase in revenues. And this is understandable as the government plans to recover from excessive expenditures necessitated by the effects of the pandemic on business. This decision by the Monetary Policy Committee, I don't think is going to have a significant effect on inflation, but I foresee a return of inflation to acceptable band limits. It's just going to drop down a little bit more.
Okay, what are those acceptable band limits you're talking about? What would be acceptable in terms of Ghana for where the inflation can stand?
So anywhere plus or minus 2% of 8% is the acceptable band limit. So we're talking between 6% to 10% is what's acceptable. But we have realized that over the years, successive governments have always tried to maintain single-digit inflation numbers, and I feel this is what they are going to aim for. But anything between 6 to 10% is acceptable.
Okay. Now, developments in monetary aggregates in February of 2020 showed sustained growth in total liquidity, also ended up reflecting the impact of the fiscal stimulus and complementary monetary policy measures, which were implemented to mitigate the pandemic's effects. Talk to us about these policies now. Which one of these policies, driven by the administration of the president, which one of these policies do you think had the most impact in helping to sort of keep things level, let's say, as level as they could be, of course, following the pandemic?
Okay, so key among several policies that the government implemented was the absorption of utility bills by the government for the period. I'm talking water and electricity mainly. Throughout the period of the pandemic, and even as we speak, Ghanaians are using water and electricity free of charge. In addition to that, payment of certain forms of taxes like personal taxes and some corporate income taxes, together with social security payments for certain companies in industries that were really hard hit by the pandemic, were also pushed forward to reduce the burdens that the coronavirus had placed on them. I think the final thing that I think about is that frontline health workers received increments to their salaries to compensate for the increased risks they faced. I think that these are some of the policies that led to the sustained growth in total liquidity. However, you realize that a lot of these reliefs are simply liabilities that were pushed forward to cater for the immediate problem. They will therefore have to be settled at some point in the future. That future is pretty much now. So, for instance, we are hearing that some of the newly introduced taxes are supposed to help in settling some of the costs that the government incurred in providing some of these freebies that it gave during the pandemic. We have also heard that the government of Ghana has also informed workers in the public sector, just like I mentioned earlier, that they shouldn't expect any significant increment in salaries this year. In essence, we expect that this growth in total liquidity should slow down very soon.
Okay, let's talk quickly now about interest rates on the money market. So we've seen that they've broadly shown downward trends for some of the short-dated instruments, and there's been some mixed trends for the medium to long-dated instruments. How have the bond sales performed in your estimation? Will they be impacted by keeping the lending rate at the same level, at the same price?
I think that what really impacts the bond market is how investors will continue to perceive the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the economic outlook of the country. Bonds are, usually medium to long-term instruments, which are generally viewed as a bit risky due to their long tenures. Where a country's future prospects don't look too bright, investors will typically stave off bond sales. The main aim of the policy rate, as I've mentioned again in my earlier submission, is to support the executive government in its quest to control inflation while avoiding an overly uncomfortable contraction of the economy for businesses that have already been battered by the pandemic. And I think that this will have very little effect on bond sales. I think that the policy rates that the Bank of Ghana has set will really have a very little effect on the bond sales.
All right, so now let's also talk about the private sector. So we've seen that credit growth has slowed down in Ghana, according to the bank, in the first 2 months of the year. And they say this is due to the constrained demand for credit. Will maintaining the rate have any positive effect on Ghana's economy? Can it have any positive effect also on private sector credit as well?
Well, growth in the private sector in itself has slowed down. Some sectors did experience growth, but most companies in the private sector saw a decline. It's only natural that supply and demand of credit for these companies slows down as well. Banks are cautious about lending to anyone at this time because the future still isn't too clear for them with regards to how the economy will continue to support businesses to grow and thrive. I don't think the policy rates will be able to stimulate demand for credit. I think that I keep mentioning this, but I think that the stimulation of demand for credit by companies in the private sector will largely depend on how the coronavirus is managed and how it affects the economic outlook into the future.
So let me ask, were you surprised that the Bank of Ghana's Monetary Policy Committee actually kept interest rates at the rate it is now? This is the 6th consecutive one, I believe it is. So they've been very careful, very cautious in what they decide. But are you surprised by the decision?
Not at all. I think that at the moment, 14.5% seems to be the magic number, and it's kind of working because the monetary policy, as you have mentioned, is used by government to control the supply of money, which tends to help to control inflation. Since May, the average inflation has been a little over the over the targets. That's over the 10% that I mentioned. Typically, successive governments in Ghana try to maintain single-digit inflation numbers. However, with the kind of economic situation we find ourselves in, measures to drive the inflation really low could be very detrimental to various aspects of the economy. I mean that if the Monetary Policy Committee had raised the policy rate, it would have become even more expensive for businesses to borrow money. And if they had reduced it, would have counteracted the policies in the budget to reduce the inflation. And that isn't really what we want at this time, when the effects of the pandemic continues to linger on. I anticipate that the policy rates, will remain around this level for the foreseeable future.
Okay, so let's talk a bit more about this inflation and some of the underlying pressures as well. We saw those also go up marginally over the period, which is quite consistent with headline inflation trends. But specifically, what were these underlying pressures that the Ghanaian economy was facing that they were also, running almost in tandem with headline inflation?
I think that it was just a situation of a negative and positive effect of actions that the government was taking to make sure that the coronavirus didn't batter the economy too much. There are a lot of money that was being pushed into the system, but not really a lot of productivity coming out. And so when the productivity was falling and was causing the inflation to probably keep falling, the increase in the supply of money in the system was also pushing the inflation up. And I think that those negative and positive pressures sort of neutralized and then kept the inflation numbers around the headline inflation figures.
Okay, so it's good you mentioned productivity, because before we go for a break, I want to talk about this. We saw some of the key drivers of Ghana's economy helping the economy to start that process back to rebound. And some of these key drivers of economic output: construction, imports, industrial consumption of electricity, domestic VAT as well. Benjamin, do you think that this will continue in the interim? Will they continue to help drive the rebound and the recovery of Ghana's economy? These same particular sectors?
I think they will, and I think that's the opinion that the Bank of Ghana also shares, which is the reason why they kept the policy rates at the same level as they have for the past 6 meetings. I think that all these industries that you've mentioned will continue to be the drivers and will continue to maintain the inflation levels at the current levels. Again, it really boils down to the management of the coronavirus pandemic. If we realize that the vaccines are seen to be working, if you realize that people are taking them, people are still being mindful of the safety protocols, you realize that things will normalize. And once things normalize, the other industries that really didn't contribute much to help maintain the inflation at the levels that we have at the moment will start to play a part, and inflation will start coming down.
Okay, so Benjamin, we're going to take a quick time out, but when we come back, something really interesting is happening in Ghana, and I want to touch base with that, and that is Ghana's plans to digitize their upcoming census. That's not something that's very common on the continent, so we'll get into that conversation with Benjamin Atokwanza, who's joining us from Accra, Ghana, right after this. This is Business Edge. Stay with me. Now, Ghana's Statistical Service and the National Census Steering Committee, in consultation with the Office of the President, have endorsed Sunday, June 27th as Census Night. The 2021 Population and Housing Census will help Ghana get credible and comprehensive data on Ghanaians towards transforming the economy for sustainable development. The GSS is the main agency for the conduct of the census and has divided the country into 51,921 enumeration areas to ensure easy collection of geospatial data across the 260 metropolitan, municipal, and district assemblies. Now, the vice president, who recently launched the 100 days countdown to the census night, said government was determined to build a digital data-based society to transform the national economy. Benjamin Atokwanza is still with me. Benjamin, we know that digital censuses are not common in Africa. Why is Ghana using this method? Do you think that we might still see a need for field enumerators as the census kicks off?
Well, any process that shifts from manual or physical interactions to the use of technology increases efficiency and effectiveness. Field enumerators will still be deployed to do the headcounts, except in this case, various IT solutions will be employed to ensure quick and then accurate capture of data. An app is also being developed or has been developed to enable citizens to track activities of the Ghana Statistical Service and to allow them to communicate concerns easily. The Ghana Statistical Service has already conducted trials in certain locations, I think about 2 locations. And so I think that they are really ready to begin this process. And we expect that everything will be smooth, and we expect that the Vice President's vision of trying to digitize the economy, will really be realized, and the advantages that come with it will be seen by everyone.
Okay. And as you mentioned, the GSS did conduct trials, and those were in 2019, getting ready for what was supposed to happen in 2020. But of course, as we know, because of the pandemic, that has been pushed back now. So this digital census is expected to help transform Ghana's informal economy particularly. What's the link between the two, between this census and the informal economy, between the digital census and transforming Ghana's informal economy?
I think that the main reason why any country does a census is to get an idea of how many people they have, the age groups, and what resources they can deploy to these areas to help support them, so that you don't supply something that a certain group of people really do not need. The census provides that kind of information, and we have also realized that since the beginning of the current administration in 2016, a priority of the president and his vice has been that they want to try to get everyone on a specific platform to widen the tax base and to know, where everyone is at every point in time. And this digitization of this exercise is one of the ways of capturing the informal sector, because a lot of these people really do not pay taxes and are really not involved with the things that the government needs to do to help to develop the country a lot. And so once this information is digitized and once it is captured on a database that is really reliable, we realize that we're able to bridge these 2 things that you have mentioned.
You've mentioned tax, so a lot of people do think that this is heading towards a taxation conversation for the informal sector. But also, interestingly enough, with Ghana doing this digital census, it will now also link up with the West Africa project, which will link, I think, about 7 other West African countries and their information. So, Benjamin, as we wrap up now, every 10 years since 1981, Ghana has conducted the population enhancing census. However, because of the emergence of the COVID-19 pandemic, the 2021 was moved to April and May of this year. What do you expect this census to show? Do you expect anything surprising, or is it just going to, of course, follow some of the population growth numbers, some of the informal numbers that we're getting in terms of how many Ghanaians are involved in the informal sector of the economy as well? What do you expect to come out of this?
I don't expect anything different from what has been happening over the years. Over the years, the population has been growing steadily. The younger population has also been growing more than the aged. We have seen that we have seen improvements in our health sectors. We have seen access to information and all of that. And so I expect that the population will grow, maybe not faster than previously, but I expect the population to grow, and then for the younger population to also be growing along with it, to be the main drivers for this.
All right, Benjamin Atol-Kanza from Accra, Ghana. Thank you as always for joining me on Business Edge.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. We'll be wrapping things up right now with NC4 to watch. Here are a few stories we are keeping our eyes on. The Central Bank of Nigeria has held its benchmark lending rate at 11.5%. Now, the governor of the bank, Godwin Emefiele, said that 6 members of the bank's Monetary Policy Committee voted to hold the rate. This would allow the bank to deploy liquidity into employment generation and output stimulating sectors of the economy. South Africa's National Treasury is considering whether it would be better to move a chunk of Eskom's 464 billion rand debt, that's about $31 billion, into a special purpose vehicle, or have the state take responsibility for it directly. Now, under the SPV arrangement, the debt Eskom retains and any new debt it contracts would be paid off first as a priority, while that's held in the SPV which could have tenure of 10 years or more, would be last in line and would therefore likely need to be guaranteed by the state to win investor support. The world's biggest banks cut their lending to fossil fuel firms by 9% in 2021. Now, according to a report, this is because of COVID-19, although funding has still risen over the past 5 years. The report by the Rainforest Action Network, Reclaim Finance, Oil Change International, and other NGOs showed that the 60 largest banks lent more than $750 billion to 2,300 fossil fuel companies in 2020. This is down from $824 billion in 2019. And finally, the United States government, through the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, is collaborating with Google to train and mentor hundreds of Egyptian women and youth business owners, as well as business advisors in 2021. Through a focus on digital skills and online marketing, the program will help entrepreneurs build and promote their online brands and will equip business advisors with the skills to better support startups. And that's it on this edition of Business Edge. As always, thank you so much for joining me. Head to YouTube if you've missed any of our previous shows. Go to our website for more business and financial news from across the continent. And of course, follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can also watch us live on StarTimes channel 274. Until next time, I'm Tolu Lokwe Adelaru Balogun. Have a pleasant day.